into some questions because they're starting to pour in.
Yes, I
So
see that.
we've got a question. Yeah, we've got a question here regarding as an agent, if they've sold a house that was tenanted and the tenant signed an N11 form as well, it
Mhm.
closes on, let's say, as of right now, in this example, it's June 30th.
Right.
Now the tenants are saying they're moved to. What can a seller do in this situation? I mean, the question is, I guess, probably more so, what if they can't find a place? What's going to happen?
So this is something that I was thinking about in the last couple days leading up to this, video chat. The reality of the situation is in the province of Ontario, unless you have an order from the landlord and tenant board evicting someone that has sheriff provisions, you can't do anything, right? So there's a whole process that you go through. And when this pandemic came about, the sheriff is not enforcing in orders. So even if you have an active live eviction order right now, the sheriff is not enforcing them. And then the landlord and tenant board stopped conducting hearings. We're almost going on 2.5 weeks. And then they also implemented that they're not writing eviction orders. So anything that maybe you had a hearing leading up to this and you did obtain an eviction order, unless it's an emergency. So things they're deeming an impairment of safety, like things they're deeming emergencies are things like impairment of safety. I haven't seen any orders flow out of that right now since this has happened. But they're not scheduling new hearings and they're not writing eviction orders. And so the concern for anybody that's selling or purchasing a home that has a tenant in there, the reality of the situation is you're going to have to be extremely practical. You're going to have to be open to the ideas of, there's going to have to be an extension of the closing date, because if the purchaser is purchasing the property for their own use, the reality is that even if the appropriate notices were given or the tenants agreed to move out, the landlord and tenant board just isn't writing eviction orders right now. And so without that order, you can't just move in, because what are you going to do with the tenant, right? Yeah. So you have to kind of be
Well, you might have a new roommate.
Or that's true. You could certainly see if they'd be willing to share the living accommodations. So you have to think about maybe extending a closing date in light of the circumstances. Again, having open communication. So the seller, maybe there's some discussions with the tenant, a potential buyout to ensure that they're meeting their requirements under the agreement of purchase and sale. But the downfall for that is that a tenant doesn't have to agree to it. And then setting all of that aside, if you've purchased a home and there is a tenant in there and the closing date comes and goes and you don't have the ability to enforce or go to the board because you've given the appropriate N12 notice to the tenant for purchaser's use, then the reality of the situation is once the closing date comes and goes, you now have to switch hats and you're now a landlord and you're bound by the requirements under the Residential Tenancies Act. Rent, maintaining the property, ensuring that the property's, complying with maintenance standard, health standards. So it's something, again, that's right.
This is a big pickle.
You have to be flexible on this circumstance. So, it's something I think as a seller or a purchaser, you really have to have an open mind about the reality and being flexible for a closing date, the reality of potentially now becoming a landlord until the dust settles and you can move forward so that you can actually, go forward and move into the property. So it is something that is a lot of people have to be aware of right now if they've already signed an agreement of purchase and sale, or they're considering purchasing a property that has a tenant in there right now.